Ready for it? Ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, okay, let's try that again. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Ah, you went scissors twice. Okay, you get to choose then? Do you want to start or do you want me to?
You start. You're the like professional facilitator.
All right, here we go.
If we were organizing your closet, I would go first. We should totally record this because this is funny. Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Captured it. Sandra, I'm so happy to have this conversation with you today.
Hi, Dallas. It's so great to see you.
Yes. Part of our, you and I have chatted in the past, and we thought we need to actually have like interview each other because we're both in this like same sort of part in our lives right now where we are jumping into a new adventure through our ventures. So yes. you with your book, which I just got in the mail. Everybody.
Thank you. Lovely product placement. Love it. Thank you.
And I just launched a new business.
Yes. Tell me, is it trust or trust for change?
It is trust. Okay. But trust.com was taken. So trust for change is fitting, and also how you can find my website.
So tell me about trust. Like, what are you going to do? What are you doing?
What am I doing? Yeah. The story that leads up to it is I've been working in the sustainability and climate field for a long time. And I was in an organization that had a lot of energy efficiency work, which is so important. And also my specific focus is on the people. And I more and more wanted to invest my time and energy on developing an organization that focuses on the people side of the equation, both through thinking about skill development and how we facilitate meetings, how we think strategically about our organization and giving the structure needed to allow us to grow, but also just on that sort of interpersonal level of connection and how we build trust in our organizations, because change moves at the speed of trust, as the saying goes. And I wanted to invest all of my energy in that specific piece of this larger equation that's happening.
So you're saying you feel like if an organization is working on a climate action plan, for example, it's as much or even maybe more important that they think about the trust and the personal relationships going on in the organization as it is the data and the emissions and the waste and all of that?
Yeah. I think we think about organizations as these like infrastructures, like the actual things we touch, which is obviously there. Like that's what's creating carbon emissions and things like that. But I look at it, if I look at an organization, I just see lots of meetings and personal interactions that have been stacking on themselves for years and years and years and years. And those are the things that is that feeling or that culture or that understanding of how things work that are just sort of a part of the organization you join or take part in, depending on where you start, right? And how you engage in those intentionally and not sort of reactively.
So it sounds a little bit like you're also talking about habits, like habits of behavior and habits of interpersonal relationships building up over years.
Yeah, right. And I think that is a big piece of my work, is shining light that they are habits and that they are behaviors and you can change them.
That's so interesting because I feel like everything you're saying resonates a lot. So my new project that you hinted at earlier, and you
I was
happily showed the product of. It's so hilarious to like have this thing to hold up.
Yeah.
But I wrote this book called Fixation, and it's about consumption and climate change. And it is trying to provide a kind of clear path forward for a more sustainable and equitable and circular economic system, essentially. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying about the personal relationships and habit is really interesting to me because it's not at all, there's plenty of data to support what I'm saying in the book in terms of like 45% of our emissions can be traced back to household consumption and 60 to 80% of land impacts. But all of that, I feel like, doesn't move the needle for people in terms of their behavior change, right? Mm-hmm. When they're at home, or when they're purchasing things, or when they're going to the store, like I could tell you 100 times how many like molecules of carbon that relates to, and that doesn't matter. Not through ill will, it's just not the way human beings operate, I think. And so I'm a theatrical set designer by training. So I've spent my whole life thinking about my professional life, thinking about not just relationships between people, but on stage, actually, weirdly enough, relationships between people and objects.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, it may not seem that way to like the average non-set designer, but actually we have relationships with inanimate things as well. And it's very easy to see on stage because it's isolated and you've spent 45 weeks choosing exactly the right chair, and you light it very specially. But those objects on stage tell a story and create meaning. And what I realized writing the book and running the repair shops behind the book is that in our homes as well, we actually have a very complex relationship with the physical world and with the little like stage set that we create around ourselves. And those relationships and those habits are actually at the core of the book. And it's funny hearing you talk about how do you look at those and change those and understand them. That just really resonated for me.
So what have you learned about people's relationship with stuff through the repair shop and in writing the book? I think it's always nice to talk to someone who's been simmering in a specific topic for a while, right. Because I think about my relationship with stuff, and you've just had an opportunity to have conversations and learn on so many different levels with people and their belongings, and bringing them to you with their stories. Like, tell me more about sort of what you've learned about that, and also what led you to writing the book to begin with.
So I guess two big things that I learned. One, this may sound really obvious, but I really think it actually bears saying, is that having stuff is a big deal for humans. Like, this may sound silly because we really take it for granted, but it is like foundational to our species. Every human culture makes tools and makes things with those tools. We all have art, we all have clothing, we have religion, we have language, right? But if you look at that list of things, stuff is a big part of who we are actually as a species. And that extends down to the individual level, right? We, in some ways, we create our identities with some of those choices, with the choice of what we say, with the choice of what we wear, and with the choice of what we put around ourselves. This is how we sort of perform who we are, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's very unconscious in a lot of ways, because many of us, clothing's a good example. Many of us are like a little more well-versed in the language of clothing. Like, I know I want to say I'm super professional, so I'm going to wear my suit to this interview, or I want to say that I feel like partying, so I'm going to wear my dress, right? We might speak with our clothes very consciously, but actually we speak with all of those choices every single day, and we create a little world around ourselves that means something to us.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So that's one, it's like super important. And number two is that, well, I forget what number two is. So go ahead with your question.
No, I just have, and maybe this will help jog where you're heading there. I experienced a really interesting connection about the clothing side. When I was in graduate school, I taught a class that specifically taught students sort of behavioral side of the sustainability. Like, what does it mean to actually be a change agent? How do you shift gears from saying to doing? And I sort of gave the framework of behavioral theory, and they had to do a challenge. They did a lot of different challenges. They had to like figure out where their food came from. They had to do a zero waste challenge where they had to put things in a bag visible for everyone to see that they couldn't recycle or compost, and had to figure out. And those ones were like, I learned so much. I'm going to eat differently. And when it came to the waste, they're like, now I know what's compostable and what's recyclable. But the clothing challenge was that people had to go through their closet and choose their top 10 favorite items of clothing. They had to research the company and find out if they made it in a sweatshop. They had to identify how far it traveled to get to them. Mm-hmm. And then they could do a disclaimer of whether they got it secondhand or firsthand. And then they had to wear a pin. Mind you, these are like self-selected environmentalist students coming in. They had to wear a pin that was this big on their clothes for the entire week that said, my clothes traveled an average 4,000 miles to get to me. Wow. 90% was made in a sweatshop. and, 20% was bought secondhand.
That's amazing.
And they were so uncomfortable with it. They were like, this is really hard. And when I had them reflect on how their behaviors are going to change, a lot of them were like, I kind of really like the clothes I wear. There was such an identity to the clothes they wear. And I was really enlightened about how much our relationship with stuff and sort of what a good job marketing have done to make it that my values are kind of less important than how people see me in that.
Well, what's amazing about that experiment is they made, so that garment is always saying those things. It always has embedded in it the information of here's where I was made, here's the social impact of this garment, here's the environmental impact, but we can't read that, right? We can't read that information. So I love that experiment because it literally made it explicit, like this is what this garment is saying. And that's kind of one of the things I'm getting at in the book, which is that you are saying those things. You just maybe don't know it, or you won't be able to read that information until, 10 years down the line, but that meaning, that truth is actually embedded in every sort of consumption choice that we make. So the idea of really, really saying it explicitly is fascinating to me.
Another piece that I'm interested in your thoughts on is privilege and stuff. Sometimes I think about the privilege of even being like, do I need this? Like just where I am in my life, my career, and like that I have a house with stuff in it. How have you learned to identify with that in your work?
So I think a lot about, I draw heavily in fixation on the food movement, because the food movement is 40 or 50 years more advanced than the stuff movement, as I call it. And it has wrestled with a lot of these really important issues, right? Like one of the sort of problems in our country when you look at food and access, for example, in the US, it's less a question of, sometimes it's a question of quantity, but the issue that's really more pervasive, I would say, is an issue of quality, right? Is how do we get access to quality food? How do we eradicate food deserts? How do we get fresh, high quality produce into all neighborhoods? And that question for me is very much related to stuff. For many people, actually at all income levels, we're sort of awash with what I call empty stuff qualities, low quality, poorly made goods that are cheap and aren't ultimately going to serve the individual or the family the way a higher quality product would be. So the question is not how can we get more volume into everybody's home, is how can we make quality accessible to many more people.
I love that you say that, especially with two young kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they need new shoes, and I'm like, do I spend how much money on shoes that will be outgrown in maybe 6 months or so? And I have to, I have a lot of hand-me-down options because of, friends and family, but also I'm trying to learn that my connection with a kid's shoes can be passed on if I have higher quality stuff. It's really tempting to get that $10 shoe that dissolves somehow, like by the time a kid's been running in them for 6 months. But how do we, I've gotten hand-me-downs that are high quality, and they've gone through all of my kids, and then we pass them on to someone else.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that I don't see in a way to kind of pass on my privilege in giving shoes and resources to others as well.
Well, that's the key of the book. But the key to some of the very simple actionable items are if you buy new, and if you can afford to buy new, it is good to buy high quality when you can, as much as possible, sustainably and ethically produced. Everybody at all income levels really needs to turn up the dial on the used goods that they're buying, because you can't just donate. Everybody has to buy used. And then we have to build systems, as you said, to make it easier to pass things on, because right now it can be a pain to get things to someone else. Yeah. But all of those little steps in my book are sort of about just changing habits. And so this is a question I kind of wanted to send back your way as the expert on that. Someone asked me this in a webinar yesterday, like, how do we really change habits, either on an individual level or an organizational level? Like, that seems to be the question.
Yeah. When it's exhausting. When we think about behavior and we think about what we want to accomplish in an organization. And I think for me, the starting point is to understand it better, like why we're doing things to begin with. And that's why with all the people who have the opportunity to work with, I start with kind of basic fundamental behavior 101, like the why we are social creatures, why we set up habits, right? Like we process so much information that if we didn't go into autopilot, we would be consumed with data. So the fact that I brushed my teeth without even realizing, oh, did I brush my teeth? And you can drive home without realizing that you got home. Like those types of things actually really help us not get decision fatigue at every single moment of our lives. The reality is that that is not always, we weren't always intentional about what those were. And in order to be intentional, you sort of have to zoom back out and understand like why you're doing that to begin with. Sort of in the same way, connecting to the stuff like product placement and, all of like the marketing industry knows very well, like when we're about to change our behaviors, right? Big life moments, which is why when you're register for like a baby registry or something, or a wedding shower or something, people are like, this is our opportunity to have them change their behavior, because they know if I'm going to have a kid, my life is going to be disrupted enough where I'm going to adopt something new. Or if I'm getting married, there's a good chance someone's moving in with me and there's two opinions that need to like figure out a new way of living together, or starting a new job. So these big shifts in our lives is usually an opportunity to choose a different behavior. But you can also kind of create those shifts in your own life by joining a group, or like, in my case, people hire me because they know they need a little bit of a disruption, and that external facilitator can sort of like provide that, like people can kind of point at me, be like, Dallase is making me do this, right? This is like, it is a scapegoat to do something differently.
Is it a little bit of like accountability too? Like there's a person out there who's asking me or asking our organization to do this?
It's accountability, but I think some of it also, one of the things we undervalue in changing habits and behaviors is how it might impact us socially.
Right? Impact us socially?
Yeah, right. So I might actually believe in this, but I can be concerned about my social currency, that I don't want to invest that in, or I'm concerned of how my relationship with others can get in the way of the kind of the safety of being in a group and not like rocking the boat. And so often, like I've come in and supported teams where they feel like they know it's off, and they might even have a sense of why it's off, but they realize like the messaging's not going to come, like it's not going to go over well from them, and they need a zoomed out perspective of what might be going on, if that makes sense.
So do you think, is COVID then a sort of giant disruption to everybody's habits, and we all have an opportunity here to change our habits?
Yes, totally. Absolutely. I think people ask, can we do this? Can we adapt? Can we move fast enough when it comes to climate change? And I'm like, yes. And COVID is a great example. Like, if you were to talk to me in February about the entire world's daycares and school kids being home with their parents while everyone's working, I would have been like, no, it's not a thing. It's not going to happen. But we all adjusted and changed, and some of it not sustainable. And there's a lot of learning and growing and adapting, and depending on where you are, some people are getting hit a lot harder than others, but we're kind of doing this interesting dance to adapt and change. And so I think this moment is allowing us to rethink, travel, rethink how we share our streets, with bikes and restaurants and all those things. And the things that would be like, it's not safe. I don't want to take that social risk of suggesting we close down a street and put restaurant tables there. Mm-hmm. It gave it the okay to try it out. And then now people are like, this is kind of nice. So I think there's a lot of those opportunities. I'm thinking about how people re-enter buildings. Like, how do we rethink the use of all that stuff? And I think about stuff too.
Because we had the disruption of coming out of our normal patterns from COVID, and then we'll have the disruption of going back into whatever is the next phase. So it's almost like a 2-phase process. So what is like, if you had just one tip for either a person or an organization trying to make healthy changes, what would that be? Do you have just one?
I always like to have people start with themselves and understand what their role is in the organization. Because I think we spend a lot of time pointing out how if everyone else were to change their behavior, it would be functioning better, but haven't actually accounted our own contribution to a dysfunctional group. And then the second piece is sort of what I mentioned a little earlier, as to invest in understanding why your organization is not operating the way you would like it to, like what's going on. And sometimes that's a third party sort of perspective coming in. And sometimes that's if you've developed that relationship with your team or an organization to have that like kind of a 360 discussion about what's going on here and getting that honest feedback from everybody.
That's awesome.
So in thinking of, I have one more question for you, and then I think we're going to be wrapping up soon, but what's next for you in your work? Like, what are you hoping to, I mean, you just wrote a book, so that's kind of like a big deal, but how are you using that as a springboard for other things? Like I read the beginning of your book and how you started your first idea was like huge, like let's go to every Walmart and have them have a fix-it shop, which by the way, I really like that idea. And also you have these fix-it shops, you have your book, you're also doing amazing work in your other hats that you wear. What do you want to do next?
I don't know. I mean, I do have a lot of hats, as you say. They all really keep pointing back to this question of two things. One is the work on consumption, material culture, stuff, circular economy, whatever you call it. It's all one body of work. And the other has to do with teaching and education, working at Barnard and Columbia. And so I feel like wherever I go, it's going to be those two things in some combination. Always interested in tying back those issues of consumption to issues of gender and race and equality. And I do think that my work on stuff, like it's funny, the thing of like, oh, wouldn't it be great if every Walmart had a repair shop or if every store sold used goods? Well, it's happening. Like IKEA just opened their first used goods store in Sweden. Macy's did a used clothing pop-up last year. All kinds of really big businesses are beginning to dip their toe in this question of reuse and repair. So that is really, really exciting, because when I first had that thing of like, oh, Walmart should do this, that was 2013, and it was laughable. And here we are 2020, and it is in fact happening. So I am excited about that, and I want to be sort of part of that revolution.
Fantastic.
And you, where are you going next?
I'm in a deep learning curve right now of how to run the operation side of an organization, but also I'm doing a lot of learning on the JEDI work, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, recognizing deeply that the structures we put in place that are part of strategic planning, even your meetings that you run on those like hour by hour interactions with people, you're making a choice of whether you're doing it in an anti-racist framework. And I am sort of taking a step back and recognizing, if I am truly trying to support climate justice work, I need to be very intentional and thoughtful of being aware of the lens that I wear from my background and my experience, and give that space and learn about the anti-racist framework. So this movement that is happening for our stuff that we create in or like how we relate to stuff, and the plans we create to be reduce our carbon emissions and energy is not just like yet another wave of the past.
Yes,
just like
I see that. I think that all the time. Like, how do we make these big changes in a way that is different? Not just that we make things different, but do it in a way that's different. Otherwise, it won't work.
Yep. And I think a core piece of how I started my business, why I started my business, is I wanted to focus on the how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get to the, head in the direction of our goals and develop the relationships that we need to along the way, and hear from the diverse stakeholders that we need desperately to create inclusive solutions along the way. And every one of those, the how has to be so intentional. Otherwise we just fall into what was taught from our history, and most of our histories didn't lend itself to being equitable and just.
Well, that is so awesome. Thank you for telling me a little bit more about trust. I'm excited to see where it takes you. And it's I really love the idea that all of this work has these points of intersection, thinking about habit, thinking about how we disrupt our patterns, but also, as you say, do it in an intentional way that is inclusive and changes the how. I love that.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. And I'm looking forward to finding more ways for us to collaborate and share our hows and grow together, because that's what it's about, right? Gotta do it to work together.
Awesome.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Dallas. Talk to you soon. Bye.